Okay. We're a little late, Dad.
We're late?
We're a little late. I apologize to everybody out there. We are a little bit late. That was my fault. I forgot an important piece of equipment that we need to do the stream.
It wasn't me that you forgot.
No, he was here.
I was here.
Hello, everybody. We are live from Washington, D.C., in your nation's capital, here with Allan Lichtman, historian, professor. What else are you? Voting rights expert.
Father. Not grandfather, though.
Oh, gosh. You have to bring that up in front of all these people watching right now?
Yes.
Hello to everybody watching. Sorry for being late. Hello, Joseph. Hello, Michael. Hello, Captain M90s. Hello, Izzy. Hello, Ross. Hello, Bienvenida. I don't know if I said that correctly, but hello, everybody. Again, apologize for being late. Thanks for sticking in with us. We're ready to get into this. Issue 1, Ohio, the special election. Let's hear your take on it, Dad.
Well, supposedly the Ohio election was about the criteria for passing referenda voted upon by the people of the state. Republicans wanted to raise the threshold from a majority to pass a referendum to a 60% super majority. That's what it seemed to be, but that's not what it was about at all. It was about abortion rights, because Ohio's going to get an abortion referendum this coming next election cycle, and Republicans knew that they were in big trouble. It was likely to pass, so they wanted to make it as difficult as they possibly could to have it pass. So it was really abortion rights that was on the ballot, not simply a threshold for passing a referendum from the vote of the people. And here's the thing. Red America has turned blue when it comes to abortion rights. Abortion has won in such deep red states as Kansas, West Virginia, and Montana, and it's going to win again in Ohio. Republicans are desperate to try to rule in the minority. They've already had these lots of state legislatures gerrymandered. The last thing they want is a vote of the people. One of the cable outlets had John Kasich on, the former governor of Ohio. Usually he's pretty good, but he was way off the mark this time. He said, well, the thing is, we got to avoid extremes on both sides. Wrong. There's only an extreme on one side, and that is the fringe that wants to control women and oppose their views on the American people. On the other hand, are those who stand with the vast majority of Americans who believe that abortion should be generally available and safe. It's not a matter of one extreme fighting the other extreme. And this effort to control women, keep them in their place, it's nothing new. It's been going on really since time immemorial, since, biblical times. And it's, been a fundamental precept of conservatism in America, going all the way back to controlling short skirts and fancy dancing back in the 1920s, all the way up, and of course, controlling abortion in conservative states as well.
Thanks for that, sir.
Not bad, huh?
Not bad. A lot of people in the chat are saying, Sam, give your father a grandchild, and they're giving me a bunch of hoopla for it. So I blame you for bringing that to the attention of the chat. I'm mad at you.
Oh, but you know what? You can be mad at me all you want, and there's nothing you can do.
Right. Interesting points about abortion rights and how they were tied to this vote in Ohio. I think something that a lot of people aren't talking about, which I think is also important, is just the fact that what this all meant for democracy and its relation to minority rule in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about...
Great point. I briefly alluded to that in my past sentence. But democracy is in peril in at least two ways in America. And I remind our audience, democracy is precious. But like all precious things, it can be destroyed. You can't take it for granted. For most of human history, people have not enjoyed democracy. The first golden age of democracy was after World War I, when we had about 24 democracies. By the early 1940s, that number was cut in half. As to paraphrase Thomas Jefferson, vigilance, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. So how is democracy in peril? One way we've already talked about, minority rule. This is what Republicans have been pushing for. Sam, how many elections have Republicans at the presidential level won a majority in the last 30 years? One, 2004. That's it. And they're very fortunate that we are still governed by a lot of 18th century obsolete rules. We are the world's longest running democracy, and that's a great thing. But we are stuck with 18th century institutions like the Senate, which gives Alaska the same number of votes as California, and the Electoral College, which is terribly malapportioned because every state gets at least 3 votes and limits the election really to just a handful of swing states. And Republicans depend upon that. And they've enhanced that through political gerrymandering. Of a state like North Carolina, which is pretty much a 50-50 state, by gerrymandering the congressional districts, Republicans have overwhelmingly, by about 70% or more, won the congressional seats. We've seen that with the state legislature in Wisconsin. Wisconsin leans Democratic, but its legislature is overwhelmingly Republican because of gerrymandering. It's the worst thing, probably, that's a feature of our politics. And the Supreme Court has said, we're standing aside. No federal court can examine a political gerrymandering case. It's what we call non-justiciable. So there's very limited relief only in the state courts. Second way, of course, our democracy is being imperiled is by Donald Trump and his allies, who simply don't believe in democracy. They won't accept the results of a democratic election, and they're willing to do whatever it takes, set up fake, phony, bogus electors, try to stop violently, with people dying and being injured, the legitimate counting of the Electoral College votes, pressuring one person, the vice president, to overturn the results of votes by some 150 Americans. Sam, if the vice president could do that, would we ever get a change of power in Washington?
No.
No, vice president.
I'm 2 for 2 on your questions today.
Yeah, you're really good. Yes. Yeah. Excellent. So those are the 2 ways our democracy is in peril.
That was a little bleak, though, because I was asking you, it seems to me at least like the decision in Ohio actually was a shining light for democracy, a referendum on democracy. I know you just went through all the ways that...
that's right. And then you make an excellent point.
Okay.
How do you restore your democracy? A couple of ways. One, we're seeing the judicial system, the legal system, the constitutional system playing out with the indictments of Donald Trump. And by the way, forget all this nonsense. Oh, it's all political. They're out to get him. Donald Trump has been treated more deferentially than any criminal defendant maybe in the history of the country. Do you think for a moment anyone but Donald Trump would have been allowed to keep our most secret documents for a year and a half?
Can I interrupt you for a second? I've been asking you about Ohio this entire time.
I know.
And all you've been talking about is Trump.
I'm getting to Ohio now.
Okay.
And what Ohio tells us is the second way, aside from the legal system playing out, to preserve our democracy. And that is for all of you who believe in democracy to get out and vote. We still have typically less than half of eligible voters voting in midterm elections. You only have about 60% of eligible voters even voting in presidential elections. If we could just tip that by a few percentage points, we could absolutely change the political landscape of this country, because those who believe in democracy and have progressive values, unfortunately, are also those least likely to vote. And by the way, what demographic group is least likely to vote? Young people.
You didn't give me enough time to think about it.
Well, you know, this one should have been one you got right off the top of your head.
Ah, dang. All right. Well, you still barely talked about Ohio. Get out and vote. I mean, that's not a groundbreaking analysis, is it?
No, but it's true. It's the only way to really seize your democracy back. And there's another way.
Okay.
You know, what is this? The 70th anniversary of Martin Luther King's March on Washington.
There's a green line through our thing.
Yeah.
Keep going.
All right. And what Martin Luther King proved and the Civil Rights Movement proved, another way to promote democracy, advance your values, is with social action. Voting not just with the ballot, but voting with your feet. We need a revived civil rights and democracy movement, not only at the ballot box, but on the streets of America as well. We've seen that sporadically, but really since the civil rights and women's rights movements of the 60s and 70s, we have yet to see a revival of that kind of activism in America.
Okay. I mean, I still don't think you answered my question yet. But I guess what I'm trying to say to the people out there is I felt hopeful after seeing that vote.
And you should.
Like a restoration of democracy. It seems like you keep going back to the bleaker side of things. But
hey, it's because I'm an old fogey.
I thought old fogies are supposed to be wise and, see the true light in all things, no?
I see the pathway in all things, but
okay.
I'm old enough to know one swallow does not make a spring. But I did say right at the start, that when it comes to abortion rights, red states have turned blue.
Right.
And this is an issue because it involves fundamental freedoms. And, for so long, the right wing in America has been all out about controlling women. As both of our political mentors, your mom and my wife always says, when you strip away misogyny, racism, and anti-Semitism, there's not much left of the right wing. And that's really a lot that explains Trump's ascendancy and why his base does not crack. But this is fundamental. Freedom for women means freedom for all of us. As our mentor, Karen Strickler, also says, you can judge any society by how it treats its women.
Very true. A lot of people in the chat are asking, is this vote a good sign for Sherrod Brown?
This vote is a great sign for Sherrod Brown, the Democratic populist kind of, the younger, more dynamic version of Bernie Sanders. This is a great sign for Sherrod Brown because he's going to run on the abortion issue. And it's not, as I explained, a minor issue. It's a fundamental issue. And Ohio, I think, is going to go the way of Kansas and Montana and West Virginia, turn blue on abortion. And I predict, it's not based on any system, but on my gut, that Sherrod Brown is going to be reelected.
Is that an official Allan Lichtman prediction?
Yes.
Okay, official Allan Lichtman prediction. I'm sorry for all this stuff around the screen, people. I don't know what keeps happening, but you still.
And what happens if I'm wrong?
If you're wrong, you have to do 50 push-ups.
Fair enough. And we'll all cry if Sherrod Brown loses, believe me.
Right.
He's a great voice in the Senate.
Maybe if you're a Republican, you won't cry.
No, if you're a Republican, of course, you'll rejoice.
Are you showing your bias right now, Professor Lichtman?
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
Everybody has political views, right? Even those who claim they don't. There was some editor of the Washington Post says, I don't even vote because I don't, want to have political views. That's nonsense. That's just hypocrisy. You're fooling yourself. But here's the thing. If you are a good scholar and if you are a good predictor, you've got to put your political views aside. Here's the secret to being a successful scholar and predictor. It's not knowing politics, although you got no politics. Not knowing math, although you got no math. It's not knowing history, although you got no history. It's putting aside your own personal views. That's why I was able to predict Donald Trump in 2016, which of course did not make me popular, and 90% plus Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University, and where Donald Trump claims he can't get a fair trial. What a lot of nonsense.
90% plus Democratic Washington, D.C.
Yes, what did I say?
You just said 90%
Percent
plus. 90% plus what?
Democratic.
90%
You got
plus
it. That's why I have
raccoons?
someone young and sharp to check up on me.
Right, I gotta keep checking up on him.
Got to.
We had a nice little comment from Ross Goldberg. They said, I never thought before that I would ever join a live chat with a legendary U.S. historian, Professor Allan Lichtman, and his son, Sam Lichtman. Thank you, Ross. Thank you for joining us. That's a very nice comment.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the Senate. You mentioned it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the rule of the minority. I've heard a lot of political scholars say that they actually like the Senate, that it brings some balance, that it doesn't sway like the House does, and that is good for American democracy. What's your response to that?
There was something to that. You do need something of a counterpoint, and I'm not claiming we should turn the Senate into the House, but it's too extreme. You know, when Alaska or Montana has the same votes as California with 60 times the population, that's too much. You know, when the framers set up the Senate, you know, way back in the 1780s, the difference between the largest state and the smallest state wasn't that great. It was more like 5 or 6 to 1, not 60 to 1. So in my book, which you should all get, 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, I propose a compromise where you don't have every state the same, but you don't go to proportional representation like in the House, where you have a sliding scale that would go from 2 for a state like Alaska or Montana, and 10 or 9 for a state like Texas, Florida, New York, and California. That would preserve the balance, but it wouldn't be as extreme as we have right now.
People are asking, there's some interesting comments about the biasy thing. The Alex Trifier, who is a concurrent viewer, says, if you don't get into politics, the politics might just get into you. That's a pretty good line. You like that one?
I might steal it.
Uh-oh.
That is
Alex, he might steal it.
Yeah.
But that was a really good line. So thanks you, Alex, for sharing that.
great line, and I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that either. Joseph Kolowski says 13 Cracks is an excellent book filled with excellent notions.
Thank you. What I think distinguishes
I'm kidding.
13 Cracks is it has specific remedies for all of the flaws in the system. It's just not ranting against. It actually has a whole series of positive changes.
Why don't you give people a sneak peek? Why don't you tell them one of the cracks that needs repairing?
Well, I already talked about the Senate and the Electoral College and explained how that can be repaired. Another crack is there is really no check on executive proclamations, executive orders. We've seen presidents use that to really ride roughshod over the democratic process and the American people. And it takes forever for that to go to the courts. So I proposed a special court, just like the tax court or the surveillance court, special court dealing just with abuses of executive power. One of the great ironies of Donald Trump is he always talks about the Justice Department being weaponized against him. Well, under Donald Trump, the Justice Department was weaponized more than we have ever seen, with Justice Department intervening in the prosecutions of Donald Trump's associates and cronies like Roger Stone or Michael Flynn. So I proposed a set of rules for keeping the federal executive out of the Justice Department and keeping it independent. Those are just a few of many remedies.
Nice. H.V. Bart asks, hi, Professor. Switching gears for a second. Given that this week marks the 78th anniversary of this happening, do you believe President Truman made the right decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And also, the new movie Oppenheimer has come out, which some praise, some criticism. So it's a pretty hot button topic. Do you have anything to add to that? I mean, as a historian, you're a presidential historian.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that there's a definitive answer. I hate to waffle on it. On the one hand, it was a horrible thing. you know, hundreds of thousands of people died. On the other hand, who knows, you know, whether the war would have gone on, whether more people would have died. You know, maybe not, but you never know. Counterfactuals don't work. And we had, you know, the war killed over 60 million people. We killed, you know, so many in our bombing raids in Germany before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. But I have to say, and how as horrible as this is, one positive has come out of it. The bomb hasn't been used again. And today we have bombs, get this, you know, 500 times the explosive power of the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs. 500 times, and we have many thousands of them. As you know, one nuclear analyst said, in today's nuclear war, the only question would be, how high would the rubble bounce? So since then, that was so horrific. Maybe that has played a critical role in not having a nuclear holocaust since then.
Interesting. I mean, you haven't seen the movie yet. I've seen it. I'm sure some people watching have seen it. I don't know. I thought Truman's depiction in that was in the movie Oppenheimer was strange. I'll have to, once you see it, we'll have to get your take on it. But
absolutely,
it was a very strange. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But
No.
I just thought it was very strange. Sorry, Alex Treefire. I keep mispronouncing your name. Alex Treefire. You keep telling me. Let's move on to your good friend, your buddy Clarence Thomas, Dad. Do you think Clarence, this is from Eris, do you think Clarence Thomas will resign after the ProPublica article?
I would say there are two chances that Clarence Thomas will resign. Slim and none. You know, in the age of Trump, there is no shame anymore. It really doesn't matter how deeply mired you are in scandal. These right-wing politicians have no shame. And you're not going to impeach him. You're not going to, you know, force him out. He doesn't care. Donald Trump doesn't care. Clarence Thomas doesn't care. You could pile 10 times the scandal on him. It's a horror show. This man was clearly bought and sold by billionaires. More and more comes out. What are there now? 28 luxury trips. A 737 was sent for him just to pick him up, to take him on a luxury vacation. They paid the tuition for his nephew, who he was raising as a son. They bought out his mom's house and let her live there rent-free. There are so many scandals, I can't even say them in the time constraints we have, but I promise you, it made absolutely no dent on Clarence Thomas whatsoever. You know,
is anything going to be done, or is it just
nothing is going to be done? You know, remember Joe McCarthy, the red-baiting bullet back in the 50s? He was brought down by the attorney Welch, who said at the end of his bullying, "Have you no shame, sir? Have you no shame?" Donald Trump and Clarence Thomas have no shame. Just as Donald Trump will never admit, you know, there could be 100 more court cases that he lost the election, Clarence Thomas will not budge and will not show any shame, any remorse, any regret for what he did. You know, in the Roe versus Wade decision, which so mercifully, you know, we're seeing now in places like Ohio, Montana, Kentucky, Kansas, even conservatives standing up for women's rights. The Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, saying, you know, it's not in the Constitution, you got to infer it. Well, is it in the Constitution that money is speech? And, you know, these billionaires can spend all the dark money they want without any regulation. Is it in the Constitution that corporations are people? And, you know, like you and I have all of these due process protections. Is it in the Constitution that there is an individual right to keep and bear arms separate from a well-regulated militia? Not a single person who framed, voted for, or ratified the constitutional amendment, Second Amendment, ever said that.
I forgot who asked this now. I've lost it in the chat, but somebody asked in relation to the 13 Cracks book, in relation to this news with Clarence Thomas and the Supreme Court, you got any fixes, Dad? You got any fixes to the Supreme Court?
Yes. Supreme Court should be subject to the same ethical standards as every other judge. Supreme Court justices are the only judges who have no ethical standards of any kind, who can do whatever they want, and the only way they can be punished, really, is through impeachment. And a Supreme Court justice was actually impeached once back in the early 1800s in the age of Thomas Jefferson, but was acquitted. There have been lower court judges who've been impeached and convicted, but no Supreme Court justice. So there's really no check at the moment, and there should be. In fact, the justices of the Supreme Court, because they are so supremely powerful, they can take away fundamental rights like the right to a safe and legal abortion that's been around for 50 years. They should be subject to the highest, not the lowest, of ethical standards. Just another paradox of our 18th century system.
Thank you for that, good sir. Sorry, I like to mess with him sometimes, guys.
Mess with me?
Yes.
Mess with me at your peril.
Ah.
I'm a trained bodyguard.
That's what he likes to say, at least. A lot of questions in the chat about the keys. If you have questions about the keys, a lot of the stuff you guys are asking, we've already talked about in previous episodes. So I would go back and watch previous episodes. A lot about foreign policy, a lot about the economy. We've talked about that now multiple times.
Yeah, I don't have anything new on the keys.
Right, there's nothing new on the keys. He hasn't made any official prediction on the keys. So
you'll be the first to know.
Yeah, you guys will all know when it happens. But, I mean, thanks for the questions, no doubt. Thanks for the questions. But I just wanted to address that because there's so many questions coming in about the keys. Again, we've talked about foreign policy. We've talked about the economy. So go back into other episodes.
And about incumbency and internal party fights. We've covered all that.
And charisma, we've covered all that. So, yeah, go back and check out the previous episodes. And once he makes an official prediction, trust me, you guys will know. It will be breaking news.
That will be big news,
Yeah.
yes. I'm continually asked, and I continually say the same thing. I've not made a prediction yet.
Yes, that is
Sometimes
true.
I can make the prediction early, like for the very hard to call 2012 election, when a lot of pundits were picking Romney. I called that in 2010 because the keys fell into place. So the keys can predict, but you can't predict when the keys will fall in place.
Yes. We have a question. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to keep track of this chat, guys. Being late got my brain all flustered. So, all right, I can't find it. Back to the bottom of the chat. What do you think? This is from Ish on Belmont. Professor Lichtman, what do you think of John? I'm not sure how to say this guy's name. Mearsheimer? Mearsheimer. Do you know who that is? No, he doesn't know who that is, I don't think, but I saw his silence.
I might, but not off the top of my head, and I don't know if it's spelled right.
Okay. Linda Fusco says, "We love you, Allan, and we love your son, too."
Oh.
Thank you, Linda.
Wow.
You know, his son has a name. It's Sam.
That's a really easy one, like Uncle Sam.
Right. A lot of questions about the keys in the chat. Guys, I'm telling you, go back and look at other stuff. There's no prediction. Somebody asked, if we have no recession and everything goes fine for Biden to likely win in 2024, will Biden-Trump rematch be very close race like in 2020?
The keys don't predict margins. But here's a lesson for all of you. Forget the polls and the pundits 15 months out before an election. I love my friends in the media. I think they're really smart. But they have to cover the election every day. They can't just say, Lichtman's keys predict this, see you in November. Doesn't work. They won't make any money. They'll all get fired. So what's the easiest way, Sam, to cover an election every single day?
Cover it like a horse race.
Yes, using what to know who's ahead and
polls.
The polls.
I'm 3 for 3 today.
You're a genius. You're like a genius anyway.
Right.
So, but the polls mean nothing. They're a freeze frame. They're a snapshot in time. they're not predictive, certainly not predictive 15 months out. Do to them what the great philosopher David Hume said, do to works of superstition, consign them to the flames. Not only are they not worth anything, they're misleading. Right now it looks close based on the polls and, long before anyone's voted. But in the end, it's a much ado about absolutely nothing. Trial could change everything. If he's acquitted, that could be an enormous boost to him. If he's convicted, who knows, what the consequences of that may be. We also don't know which trial is coming first. It's likely to be either the New York trial or the January 6th trial, but we don't know. And if it's New York, it'll be probably televised. If it's federal court, it may not be televised. Whether the trial is televised or not may make a big difference. And here's another one for you, Sam. Who has the final word on whether a federal trial will be televised or not?
The judge?
Which judge? Not the trial judge. John Roberts,
the Supreme
Chief
Court.
Justice.
I was about to get there.
Got to be fast,
Dang it.
You snooze, you lose.
People are asking about your thoughts about Tim Kaine and John Tester, Montana and Virginia.
I think Kaine is probably going to be okay. We had a blip for Democrats in Virginia with the election of a Republican governor. Tester is probably the most vulnerable of all Democrats. I'm not, your best source for examining, individual Senate and House races. I'm more of a big picture guide. Check out the Cook Political Report if you want an assessment of individual races. But I think Tester is a big test of whether a Democrat can survive in a red state.
Wow, a pun.
Yeah, pretty good. And
God
knows what Joe Manchin is going to do. He's talked about, leaving the Democrats, running for third party, not running again for the Senate. Who knows with Joe Manchin.
Last I heard, the last report on Joe Manchin I heard was that he's seriously considering changing to the independent. I can't speak.
Whatever,
what I'm trying
really
to say.
Means absolutely nothing. We saw that with Sinema. The Arizona senator. As long as you caucus with the Democrats, that's all that matters. Angus King has been, an independent senator for forever, but he caucuses with the Democrats. Bernie Sanders is a socialist. He caucuses with the Democrats. That's all that matters.
Yep. Obama Soda, a really concurrent viewer, big-time fan. We love you, Obama Soda. They ask, Allan, what's your opinion of Russ Feingold?
God, I'd like to see Russ Feingold come back. I wish he had come back and defeated Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. Feingold was important for trying to push campaign finance reform. But unfortunately, that's all been undone by Supreme Court decisions. But I was a Feingold fan, and I'm not a Ron Johnson fan. And it's not just because he's a Republican. He's just used to be a decent, moderate Republican, but has completely gone off on the deep end recently.
This is an interesting question from Ross Goldberg. Why have polls consistently shown that most voters in the U.S. have not approved of anything that Biden has done, despite all of his successes in domestic, foreign, and economic policies?
Well, it's a really, really good question. And it's a bit of a mystery to me, actually. Part of it is polarization. You're never going to get what George H.W. Bush had, close to 90% approval after the 1991 Gulf War, or even, Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan, 60% approval. It's just not possible anymore because, at least 40% is going to be solidly against you no matter what you do. So that means you're not starting, from 100, you're starting from 60. And any loss on that, brings you down into the 40s. Obama was pretty much in the 40s. I won't even talk about Trump. The other thing is Democrats have been terrible at messaging. Republicans, I think, have for quite some time out-messaged the Democrats. And somehow the message of Biden's achievements aren't getting out and aren't hitting the American people.
I also think that inflation has really hurt him too. I mean,
What Biden has done really well is jobs. He's created, virtually a record number of jobs for one term. But jobs and unemployment, they don't affect everyone. Inflation affects everyone.
I was going to say that, but you interrupted me.
Oh, I did? I didn't think so.
Well,
Anyway,
not really.
Let me finish the thought. So inflation affects anyone. And Biden is not responsible for the inflation. It's a worldwide problem. It's worse in a lot of other countries than it is in the U.S. But as Herbert Hoover, a man who should know, once said, the president gets the credit for the sunshine and the blame for the rain.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Bill H. asks, Allan, if Trump ends up being detained before trial, do you see mass rioting across the country?
I absolutely do not. The one thing that's really struck me about the political situation, the polls have shown, Republicans and Democrats neck and neck, Trump neck and neck with Biden, not, as Trump claims, way ahead. Not true. They were pretty much even within the margin of error. The polls, the generic polls on Congress are about even. But when you actually get down to voting, Democrats have done really well. As we saw in Ohio, that was a bellwether vote. 56%, voting against the attempt to block the will of the voters. That's extraordinary in a state where Trump won easily, even when he was losing in 2020. We saw in Wisconsin, in the pivotal Supreme Court seat that's going to rule on gerrymandering, the liberal Democrat winning again in a near landslide by something around 10 points. We've seen whenever Donald Trump has said, I want you to come out and demonstrate, it's fizzled. People have not shown up in New York or D.C. or even Florida. So when you get away from the polls and look at what's really going on, when people have to act, it's looking better for Democrats than you might think. But again, I make no predictions about 2024 at any level. It's just way too soon, and there are way too many issues and matters hanging in the balance.
You just predicted that Sherrod Brown was going to win in the beginning of the stream.
Oh, you caught me.
You just said I'm not making any 24 predictions on any level. Isn't an Ohio Senate race?
Except the Ohio.
Okay.
Well, I'll make a few, here and there.
Okay.
But not a generic pronouncement.
Okay. You stand corrected. Here's an interesting question from Christine Geese. Thinking of the similarities between now and the years leading up to Lincoln's election win, aren't the cracks in the Republican Party a hopeful sign that America will be okay?
I don't see the Republican Party cracking that much, unfortunately. Here's the thing. If you look at Donald Trump's approval ratings, he's been, pretty much a presidential candidate for the last 8 years, right? Since 2015. His approval ratings never move. They're always in that 40, 39, 41, 42% range. I did see one poll a few days ago where he was down to 30, but that is probably an outlier poll. So I don't see the Republican Party really cracking. That's pretty much what the Republican base has always been, So where's the cracks? Yes, there are some prominent Republicans, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, who've come out against Trump. But what's happened to those two?
Bonk.
Bang. Anyone who's come out against Trump is gone, right? Even Ben Sass, from Nebraska, gone, I forget who said it, but it was a very smart journalist who said, you keep saying Trump isn't a real Republican, isn't a real conservative, is splitting and cracking things. You might want to rethink that when you see the Republicans and conservatives are uniting behind him.
Interesting question from Will Struchtemeyer. Will a Republican ever win the popular vote again in the presidential election?
I think it's going to be very difficult. Here's the thing. You've got two states, New York and California, where the Democrats rack up 5 to 6 million excess popular votes. which count for nothing in the Electoral College. They could win those states by one vote, and they get the same number. There's not even a Republican state that's close. The closest is Texas, which is under 1 million. And I don't even add in for the Democrats New Jersey, Illinois, Maryland.
That was a good joke.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very, very difficult for Republicans to win the popular vote, even though they certainly can win the Electoral College. The other thing is the electorate is becoming less favorable to Republicans. It's becoming younger, more diverse, and the biggest declining voter group is white Christian men. And you know what the two most rising voter groups are? They're not what you think.
Give me a second to think about this. Don't interrupt me. The two biggest rising voter groups in terms of demographics.
Demographics and one demographic and one ideology.
Muslims?
No. Asian Americans.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And those who say they're non-religious. The non-religious are just shooting up.
I was way off on that one.
Yeah. And the white Christians are the biggest decline. They used to dominate, and no longer. Even if you add in white Christian men and women,
right?
They've declined markedly over the last generation.
Look, America is a melting pot. It always has been. It always will be. It's going to keep mixing.
Well, much more so than ever. We are going to be a majority-minority nation in the next 20 years.
Yes. But I'm just saying in terms of in the 1700s or the 1800s when it was not just Anglo-Saxons, people living in America. It was also, Italians and Greeks and
African Americans and Native Americans.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna start wrapping up here.
Yeah, we should be wrapping up.
One final question from Joseph Kolakowski. I can't. It's really hard. The chat is like
They're tiny,
just far enough away that I can barely read the name. So it's hard for me to say the name.
But
sometimes.
you're doing your best. You're like a genius.
I'm doing my best. An interesting, fun question to wrap us up: is Trump going to debate on August 23rd? Now we've got the. If you don't know
I don't think so.
Let me finish. Let me finish the context.
I thought you were done.
Well, if people don't know, there's a GOP debate coming up on August 23rd. Is Trump going to debate?
The last thing I ever try to do is get into Trump's head. But I don't think so. But let me say something else about Trump that I think is really relevant here. You hear all the time the pundits saying, did Trump genuinely believe that he lost the election by fraud? Did he genuinely believe it was stolen from him? And, is that going to be an issue in the trial? There's a famous Zen Buddhist saying, unask the question. That is an irrelevant question when it comes to Donald Trump. As I pointed out in my 2017 book, 6 years ago, The Case for Impeachment, the usual notion of true and false does not apply to Donald Trump. Everything is transactional. He doesn't look at things as, gee, what do I really believe? Is this true? Is this false? He only looks at things in terms of what is in it for me. That's why in the spring of 2020, before anyone had cast a vote, he had already begun to claim that the vote was going to be rigged, to set up himself to challenge the vote and try to stay in power regardless. He didn't care one way or the other what the truth was. Irrelevant to Trump. All he cared about was, can I ride this claim of fraud, not to uphold some principle, but just to stay in power?
There you have it, folks. Another Trump rant from Allan Lichtman to end off the show.
Of course.
Gotta love it.
Gotta have it.
I mean, it was a Trump question that time, so I will concede and say it makes sense that you were talking about Trump because it was a Trump question. Okay, folks, we're at 44 minutes. Thank you all for tuning in. I see a lot of returning viewers. I'm also seeing new viewers, so that's awesome. Too. Keep tuning in Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. I know I was late this time, but we'll try not to be too late. Share with your friends and family. Subscribe, like, all those things that you click on YouTube. Click them, share them. You know that jazz. We're trying to build the channel. We're trying to keep this going, and that only happens with your support.
Yes, let me say, the one thing we've really tried to do, and Sam's been great in this, is get you involved. We actually answer your questions and take your questions seriously. So it's not just us, it's all of you. And as Sam says, it's so important to build our viewer base and to keep those incredibly good questions coming.